This episode of The Probable Cause features discussions of domestic violence and child abuse. Viewer discretion is advised.
Worried when I crossed the Michigan line, a cop from Steuben County waiting on I-69. A headlamp went out while he pulled me over. Charged me with possession after I rolled down the window.
Now that's skunk.
Indians a trip when it comes to weed. It's like who doesn't smoke or use gummies? Your grandpa, your brother, your rich friend from school? Hell, throw in the whole courthouse and my attorney too. It's time those assholes change these stupid laws. It ain't worth the paper for a probable cause. Sitting on a bar stool in my usual place, this guy next to me said he was looking for some cocaine. Hell, I just sold him an 8-ball with a little piece off for me. But my buyer was a cop? Should have known he was a creep. So I'm a dealer, right? You gotta be kidding. It's a rich man's drug. I just take it because I'm injured. 8 years in Westville with a monkey on my back. There's more drugs in here than you can shake a shank at. One dirty drug test, man, this system's flawed. Undercover screwed me in my probable cause. Street crimes never did me no favors. I'm hooked on Fetty. I'm a junkie, not a felon. Told that son of a bitch on the way to lockup. I can't seem to shake it. I need help, not mocking. What do you want from someone who's been through the system? Drugs all through the house before mom and dad went to prison. Throw me in jail and give me a fine? Someday I'll be dead and away from your kind. Now I'm at the courthouse in front of a judge. Can't say my public defender cares for me much. Crimes are committed on both sides of the law. God help me now with this probable cause. C-shift never gets old. Anything can happen when you're out on patrol. You think I'm just eating donuts, man? Give me a break. Nothing on this job is a piece of cake. Lights and sirens activated. This knucklehead wants to chase. Baby mama at the scene just spit in my face. Wife's worried that someday I won't be pulling up at all. You'll read about my killer in a probable cause. She went through my phone and she seen my text. I told her forget it. It was just my ex. She took a swing and knocked me flat. Man, I went wild and hit her back. Judge slapped me with a no contact order. Now she's got the kids and she's staying with her mother. So she started it all and I have to take the fall. You can read my whole story in the probable cause. When I was young, caught a case for dealing and did my time. Yeah, I got a record, but I was doing fine. Running my own business on the southeast side. Yeah, I got a gun. I kept it on hand. Told the cop my reason, thought he'd understand. In this neighborhood, you need some protection. Attorney thought I could get just community corrections, but the judge decided to send me to prison. Can't get ahead no matter how hard I try. Read the probable cause, it'll make you
Whispers
cry.
and rumors that don't get reported. Stories I write that are often distorted. Got my notebook and pen, and I'm ready to listen. Tell me the truth, I'll consider your position. I've seen killers with eyes so cold and dead, and others go to prison because of what someone said, rotting away for the rest of their lives, leaving a hole here on the outside. Things are sad here on Earth, and it's no wonder why, when you consider the sociopaths who remain in charge. It's me who sees the system for all its flaws, and I usually start with the probable cause. My right hand is reading the probable cause. Welcome to The Probable Cause. This is a podcast covering the criminal justice system in Allen County, Indiana, and in the surrounding region of about 11 counties. I'm Jamie Duffy, a journalist and your host, and with me is co-host Michael McAlexander. We do call him Mike, and he is the Allen County Prosecutor. Also contributing will be my right hand, who wishes to remain anonymous right now. I believe that some of you will be able to recognize her voice as we go along. Today we're going to hit on the topic of protective orders and no contact orders. According to research I've done, there's about 3,500 orders of some kind or other that come out of Allen County annually, so it is a big deal here. But first, we're going to talk about what's going on in the courts, because we do have a couple of murder trials going on this week, which I made it to both of them yesterday to hear opening arguments, and I will be writing something that will appear on our Facebook page, The Probable Cause, and yeah, that's it. So can you talk a little bit, or should I open up with who was charged and what was going on?
If you've got all that information.
Yeah, I do. So,
and I'll throw the disclaimer in now. Defendants are presumed innocent until they're found guilty, if they are found guilty in a court of law.
And that is absolutely correct, and that is the American way, thank heavens. So Frosty and Boykin is being defended by Robert Scrumman. He's a a prominent defense attorney here. Boykin is charged with shooting to death Byron Curry in the middle of Hughes Street at 423 in the afternoon on March 7th of 2023. And the state is being represented by Tessa Helge and Deputy Prosecutor Rebecca Grove. That should be adjudicated entirely at the end of the week. We will find out whether there's a conviction or an acquittal, or sometimes there's a hung jury. Judge David Zent is presiding over the trial of Deontay Jones. He's 29. He's accused of killing Javion Granberry, who was 26 when he was driving a Chevy Impala on Christmas Eve of 2023 with his cousin Derek Granberry and Mandel Bedingfield, who's a childhood friend, and who was shot 5 times in the process of what went down at a gas station, a Shell gas station on, I want to say, Tillman Road. Another defendant in this has already been convicted of the crime. And so we will find that out. Let's see, we have Tasha Lee and Rachel Geschwend, who are representing the state, and that is Nicholas Podlasky and Skip Campbell, who are representing Mr. Jones. So the other thing I wanted to talk to about is that Mike mentioned last week that we have 62 people at the Allen County Jail who've been charged with jury. Once these are adjudicated, that would presumably take the number down to 60, only somebody just got charged with murder. So I think, Mike, you had something to add about the murder charges and your numbers that you had last week.
Well, just looking at the charges, I took a look at some statistics on this, and from 2010 through 2019, we filed an average of 10 murder cases a year. Between 2020 and 2024, a 5-year period, we've averaged 32 murder charges per year. That's more than triple the number. And that accounts for what many of us have perceived as a backlog in the court system that kind of coincided with the pandemic, but it really has nothing to do with the pandemic other than the courts were essentially closed for about 9 months where we could not do trials during that period in 20 and 21.
Well, that seems like it would be a big deal if you couldn't do trials for 9 months.
And with that increased number of filings and then not being able to do cases, and if you remember, we went through a period even when we could do cases that the jurors were spread out throughout the courtroom. There was limited access to the public.
And the media.
It was very time consuming because we had to it took longer to get juries. We would only bring in a certain number each time. So instead of normally we can pick a jury in the morning of the first day of trial. In those, it was taking all day of the first day to get a jury. So we wouldn't start evidence till the next day.
But why did it take all day? Because you had to space people out so much?
Well, normally what we do, if we have a panel of jurors coming in and it's in the 50, 60, 70 range of people, our courtrooms can handle all of those people at one time. Okay. So when the way it's structured is randomly 12 people are picked to come up by their juror number to sit in the jury box. So the focus then with the attorneys on their voir dire and explaining the case to the jury is they focus on the 12 that are in the jury box. But the other ones are there to listen to it. So what that means is when you do your first pass and you strike people that either for cause or because you don't think they'd be a good juror for this type of case, you then leave who both sides have accepted, and say you get 4 on the first pass, as we call it. Right. You then bring 8 new people up, but you don't have to go over everything you said the first go round. You can do this quicker and focus your questions on the individual person. We have the questionnaires, and we can say, now you mentioned this in your background. Is there anything about that experience with a family member or friend being involved in the criminal justice system that would influence you and make it impossible for you to be a fair and impartial juror.
Right.
Well, if you can focus just on them as opposed to explaining the whole process and burden of proof and give the background, it just moves the thing along a lot faster. So we were saddled with that even when we did come back, because it was well into 2021 before I think we got anything close to back to normal. And by that point, I think we've had a backlog that has just struggled. And it's not just murder cases. And this is one that I think sometimes the public doesn't realize, and some people in the system may not realize it. But, and this is something that your right hand can speak to later, but there is an emotional trauma that goes to getting ready to go to trial. If you're a member of a family in a homicide case, you're looking for closure, you're looking to see justice done for the person who harmed your loved one. Well, emotionally, you're going to see some things that maybe you don't like or that are new to you, that are tough to see.
Like
but
the autopsy photos?
Yeah. But also you're going to be there emotionally wanting to see it over, but also reliving the trauma of the loss. And then if you look at it like in a sex crimes person, or even on a burglary case, if your house was burglarized and you've got that sense of violation,
yes,
you're going to relive that trauma as you get ready for trial. And you can only imagine how traumatic it is for a survivor of rape, or much less a kid who has been the victim of child molesting. They're 12 or 13 years old. If it takes us 4 or 5 years to get that case completed through trial, they've lived their whole adolescence with this hanging over their head, and particularly the trauma if it's a family member, a close friend of the family, something like that. I just think sometimes we forget. It's easy within the system, okay, we're kicking this out another 3 months, 6 months before the next trial date. And it's just something that I'm very concerned about, that we address that issue.
Oh, that would be a great podcast then too. I sat next to a woman yesterday in the Frosty and Boykin trial who said that there's a 13-year-old out there who just can't come to court because it's so hard to live with it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that is actually a great explanation. We all know that there is court congestion, but you know, it makes sense that you're trying to get through these, and then yet, you know, this week there was yet another murder charge. So instead of 62, we'll probably be up at 61, who knows. So anyway, now we're going to talk about protective orders and no contact orders. There is a big difference in these, and just like the skinny on it is that protective orders are filed by the so-called victim. I just say so-called because we don't always know. Sometimes there could be a malicious intent. No contact orders are directed by a judge. They're court ordered. So if you could go into a little bit of that, Mike, would appreciate it.
Okay, protective orders are issued through the civil court here in Allen County. Our small claims division is generally responsible for those. They can also come out of family court in divorces or other family type litigation. And they essentially do the same thing. There's a piece of paper that tells you not to have contact with the other person. In criminal court, our office will request a no contact order during the pendency of the criminal case, and frequently after the case is decided during any period of probation or sentence.
Now it's time to get my right hand on the phone while we discuss the protective orders and the no contact orders. So what I was saying is that protective orders usually are initiated by the victim. Almost in all cases, no contact orders are court ordered. And what I've noticed when people get out of lockup and they come for that very first hearing over there at Bud Meeks, mm-hmm. Okay, so often the magistrate will say, hey, there's going to be a no contact order, goes into what that entails, which means that you cannot contact anybody in any single way. And you were about to say something about that.
Well, generally, it depends on what the case is. Domestic cases are generally held no bond until that first court appearance. When the court finds, they may have already found probable cause, especially over a weekend or something, because they're supposed to have that finding within 48 hours. But usually on domestic cases, the defendant isn't released until their initial hearing in front of the judge, which...
And you're talking about the felony judge.
Yes, since we changed our filing system just about a year ago. We no longer generally do what was called the 72-hour hold process, where we would bring somebody in, the court would find probable cause, they would then give us 72 hours or 3 days to file what was referred to as formal charges. Now we're usually filing those charges immediately that first day after they've been arrested.
But doesn't that put a lot of pressure on the prosecutor's office?
Yes.
And wait a minute, isn't the first domestic a misdemeanor?
It depends on the circumstances. You can have a second conviction of domestic violence is a felony, but depending...
Automatically, but the first one is a misdemeanor.
Not always.
Normally.
If it's done in the presence of a child,
Pregnant
it can
woman.
be a
If they're
felony.
pregnant.
If a pregnant, if there's certain injuries. Yeah, it depends on the severity of the case.
So anyway, I was saying that...
The first offense that's a misdemeanor, that doesn't go in front of the felony judge for the no contact order.
Correct. Yes, you're right.
That's over at Bud Meeks with the magistrates. And I've seen it over and over and over again. And then when I sit in Sam Kearns's, sometimes his, where there's clear courtroom, he's a magistrate, what I call a magistrate judge, because he's in felony court. Last week, out of about 7 people who were taking a plea, I would say at least 4 of them had violated their no contact order. So we were going to get into how effective they are, which actually they can be effective, but in this case there were a lot of people who violate it. So if we talk about the efficacy of those, it would be great, because there are about, in the United States I found some stat that there are 2 to 3 million of these protective orders, no contact orders that are filed every year. That's according to the National Crime Information Center, which is run by the FBI. So how do you feel? Do you feel that they are effective?
Yes. I mean, they're not going to be effective in every case. I mean, it is a piece of paper. It's an order. It depends on the individual person's sense of how much are they going to obey the rules that they're given by the court. Some people are rule followers, and that will stop them from violating. Other people don't care. I mean, they've committed a criminal act. We have, and most people know it's not right to steal. They don't need to have anybody tell them that, but they violate it.
But they forgot about it at the very moment they were.
So this is another tool. The criminal charge that results from a violation of a no contact order or a protective order is called invasion of privacy. And that's another one that starts off, a first offense is a misdemeanor, but subsequent offenses are felonies. In our criminal cases, sometimes we have situations, particularly if the defendant is incarcerated. And I think there's just kind of a mindset out there, especially on domestic cases, that if I can get the complaining party to not come to court or to change her story, I'll get out of this.
Uh-huh.
So it is very frequent that they will try to contact the protected person either through a phone call. Sometimes
Or how about another person?
Well, sometimes they use somebody else's PIN number to try to disguise who's doing it. Our staff listens to a lot of jail calls, and sometimes on those we can file new charges of invasion of privacy. Sometimes we file a civil contempt action for violating the court order, and those can be punished by up to 180 days with no credit time.
In jail.
In jail. So those are all things that are tools for us to enforce violations of the protective order or the no contact order later. But I certainly can't tell you. I mean, I think for victims, it's great. They know they have something that if that person comes around before he does anything, they can call the cops and show their order and say, look, he's violating that. And there's a database kept of protective orders. They're also in our local Spillman system. So the police can tell rather quickly whether there's something going on.
Oh, thank goodness for the Spillman system.
I've heard.
Go ahead.
I've heard that they have to still be there when the police get there, though, for the police to actually take them into custody.
Well, yeah, they'd have to. I would say if they find them in the area rather quickly afterwards and they've been told that somebody was there, and particularly if that's been corroborated, they'll go ahead and make the arrest. I mean, if they find them 2 blocks over running away. On the other hand,
jumping over a fence.
On the other hand, if they get there and they aren't physically present and they do a sweep and they can't find them, then they'd go through more of the complaint-driven walk-in system. You've got a control number, bring it in, and we'll look at filing either a new charge or revoking the bond that they're out on.
And you know, I've also heard some situations where the people, you know, the people who are under this court order, which means it's the victim and, you know, the offender, they would both like it to have it dropped, but it's very, very difficult to get a no contact order eliminated. If you could address that, please, or Stacy, if you have any, anecdotes.
I think there's a difference between the civil no contact order and the criminal protective order, because in the civil case, I think it's a lot easier to get those dropped than the criminal case, because the prosecutors have a criminal case that they're prosecuting.
I think that's true.
Is that accurate?
Yes. In a civil case, they usually order those ex parte, and then the recipient of the order has like 30 days to come in and contest it.
Do you want to say what ex parte means?
One-sided, where the other person isn't represented. On criminal no contact orders, we are in essence controlling that. A large number of domestic violence victims ultimately either recant or don't cooperate in one form or another, and people do reconcile. We are then kind of in the position, we have a case, depending on what our evidence was. Some cases are stronger than others. Some of them we can proceed to trial without the cooperation of the victim. But we do an assessment of the risk to the victim. And I will say, sometimes we're standing there trying to protect people from the bad decisions that they're making, of believing that that he won't do it again. And this is the cycle of violence that makes domestic violence cases so difficult.
And sometimes they both violate them. I mean, I had one attorney here tell me that this is a problem. You know, they're supposed to stay away, and yet they get together, they sneak together or whatever. And
well, we do our best to, and the courts do their best to inform the defendant that it doesn't matter if she invites you over and you go over willingly. You're still the one that's in violation. You're the one that's going to jail. The no contact order doesn't keep her from seeing you, but it keeps you from seeing her.
But if you have proof that she invited him over, is she then liable of something? For something?
Not in the criminal system.
Interesting.
But these are complicated issues. Generally what we do, Victims Assistance has a class that provides information for victims, how to create a safety plan, how to protect themselves, how to de-escalate some situations, how to get away from a situation before it gets bad. And a lot of times, if our risk assessment isn't that it's going to be really serious, lethal, we will ask that the victim take the class, and then we will agree to drop the no contact order.
So I think so many times alcohol's involved in this.
Yes.
You know, and yeah, I want to bring something in here because I know there's a lot of musical comedy people. Remember Bill Sykes from Oliver? Remember when his girlfriend or his wife sings that song, As Long as He Needs Me? This is what this reminds me of. You know, the incident takes place, she gets beaten, she's black and blue, but then she turns around and sings As Long as He Needs Me. And every time I hear this, I've had people tell me that they want to see their partner again. I've had defense attorneys complain about this, and here you are doing the best.
On the other side of that, I've known of women. I don't know if personally of men that have done this, but perhaps there are. But I know of women who deliberately invited them over and then called the police and got them violated.
See, now that is like so unfair. I know who she's talking about.
I'm not really going to comment on the intentionality of it, but I know we've had...
Oh, come on, you could do that.
I've seen a lot of bad human behavior over the years, okay, on both sides. But it is not uncommon. I've seen this happen numerous times where there's no contact order in place, and most of the time the woman is the protected person. But she's driving him to work, and they get stopped for a traffic violation. They check their IDs, and he gets arrested because he's violating the no contact order.
Right, and he needs to get to work because he needs to support the family. Oh my God, it goes on.
Yes, there's a lot of dynamics in domestic violence situations. There's no question about that. And I know some defense counsel and some people believe that we're doing too much Big Brother when we climb that far into people's lives. But our goal and the justification behind it is to keep people safe. There's nothing sadder than a domestic violence homicide that leaves children behind. Frequently, you have the homicide. A lot of times it's a murder-suicide, and the people that suffer are the kids. Certainly, this is one of those areas that we've devoted a lot of resources to, but it's everybody involved in the system. Their biggest nightmare is they let somebody out of jail. We drop the no contact order, and the parties get back together, and then they have a fight, and somebody gets killed.
And so that's probably a good time to move to...
It probably happens quite often that not somebody gets killed, but they get in a fight and the battered person gets battered again.
Yes.
Or the battered person fights back and gets charges, and you know who I'm talking about there too. It's probably a good time to move on to protective orders, because there is a serious one where Mike was talking about how children get hurt. There's a lot of blame to go around, but I'm talking about little Malachi Garrett, who was 2 years old when he was beaten to death by, I don't even think he was the stepfather, he was a live-in boyfriend.
He was a boyfriend.
It was a boyfriend. There was a protective order brought out on Lance, the father, who did introduce Malachi's law. I don't know where that is in legislation. I think the most chilling thing about the whole story is that he had an emergency custody hearing, and this is in Chins or the child court, scheduled for 4 days after that child was rushed up to the fire station on North Clinton. The boyfriend, Mitchell Van Ryn, was carrying him in his arms. He, realized that maybe he'd punched him one too many times. Firemen couldn't do anything. They rushed him to the hospital. And that was due to a protective order that she took out on him. And you guys can jump in. It's one of those stories where I did get the DCS papers. It made you sick. And as a result of that, I believe that people, I believe there have been some changes to the emergency custody and the fact of these, that ties into protection orders, if you could address that.
Well, you're talking about in that situation, the boyfriend, there was no protective order on him. I forget
The protective order was on Lance Garrett.
Right, there had been some
And then
prior.
she started shutting out his family to boot because they would babysit.
Right.
So no, there was none on him. He was acting of his own free will.
But she used that protective order to try to keep him from seeing the baby after a while. What?
Yes, I mean on that one, that was. I remember being involved in right after the death, the funeral arrangements, because I think they were doing
In Warsaw.
Yes, and we had to make some accommodations to allow Lance to be able to go to the funeral home.
And is that not heartbreaking? His father. And then I have another one that also ended in tragedy here in Fort Wayne. If you'll remember, it was about a little over 3 years ago. I can remember getting a Facebook message at 5 o'clock in the morning that something had been going on Putnam Avenue, and a 9-year-old boy was beaten to death by his mother's wife. It was Elijah Ross, and I still think about that because I knew the neighbors who were across the street. She too, the mother, Jenna Miller, took out a protective order against the actual father, who was at that time, story gets even worse, work release on cocaine possession, which of course I have a problem with that. So he had been trying to get a hold of his kids, and I want to read you the protective order that she wrote, okay, because I went down to small claims and got it. All right, or I had somebody get it once this happened. She said, I was at work when my wife sent me a message stating that, I'm not going to name him, okay, was at our home. I did interview him though, and he was in my stories that I wrote. Doors, windows, anything other that he could beat on. He drove around the block continuously honking his horn and screaming out the window. He also sent pictures to me of my house from the driveway and from the front street, stating that he was not going to leave until he confronted me face to face. He then stated to myself, sick, that he, I mean SIC, not SICK, that he was coming to me, which led me into leaving work, not knowing if he would show up. This is the heartbreaking part. Ready for it? He stated that he will continuously pop up until he has seen me and the children. He had 2 biological sons with her. He felt very responsible toward the oldest one. This was taken out in January of 2019. Let me make sure of the date. Yes, January 19. And so that was almost 3 years later, and Elijah Ross was dead. So that's just another example of where the protective order did not work. So thoughts, either one of you?
Well, I think that's always the danger in the civil protection orders because they are being done ex parte. The courts are following the law. If the right allegations are made in an abundance of caution, they're issuing those. That's why they have the 30-day time period to come in and contest them. I don't know that we see quite the same thing in criminal because we do have an independent examination of the probable cause.
Yes.
That's
us.
before the issuance of the no contact order. So there's a little more legal safeguard on the criminal side of things. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, if people are intent on doing bad things, they can lie. And they do. And we have a lot of that, I think, in these family situations because you've got so many other emotions going on than in the typical family case.
Well, and people move on to other partners. Because I interviewed this father who also, I think, had a hard time getting to the funeral of Elijah. And he said everything was cool with Jenna Miller until she got with this other woman named Alicia, who's the one who did the beating. And then all of a sudden, she didn't want any contact. You were keeping a father away from his own children. I don't care what he's done. It's not fair. Thoughts?
Well, I think the safety of the mother has to be taken into account too, because of the no contact order is typically because of violence towards the mother, not the child. But sometimes the dads use the child as an excuse to get close to the mom, to be able to be in the presence of the mom. And that puts the mom in danger, in my opinion.
But don't you think there should be some accommodation for these guys, even if they're not, saints, to be able to see their children?
Well, they can contest.
Go ahead, Mike.
They can go into the family court. They can also contest the issuance of the protective order in small claims. So they do have a legal remedy. I realize that that's not always real easy if you don't have the financial resources. It's easier if you can hire an attorney to represent you on that. It's the same thing.
Can you get a public defender for that?
No. It's also the same thing.
Legitimate, if they legitimately need a protective order, the mother needs a protective order because the father is abusive towards the mother. The father needs to figure out an arrangement for supervised visits or work out with SCAN, or I forget what their new name is, but where they can go there to visit with the child, so the mom can drop them off going in one door, the dad can come in another door, and they don't have to see each other. Then the father can have visitation. I mean, that's the ideal way if the mom truly is in danger of the father beating her again.
So maybe emergency custody hearing. I have heard that the CHINS courses are even more backed up than criminal.
Well, this is where I think many of these same issues have been discussed regarding when DCS intervenes on behalf of children. They're making judgment calls just as the criminal side is. When do you take kids out of the home to protect them? How quickly can you get things into court? Those calendars are backed up. I mean, it's tough on everywhere, and a lot of times the law lags behind remedies that need to be taken immediately. And that is tough, and unfortunately tragic things do happen sometimes because of that. And some of these issues are not as black and white as you would like. It's not always clear. We've certainly had plenty of cases where both parents are miserable parents and leaving drugs around, and the kids get into them and are killed. That part is much bigger when we dive into these family issues and how do we really want our kids raised and who does a better job of it. And it's very easy to second guess anyone who has to make those calls.
I know. That would be because we are running out of time. If you have a quick a fix to this, maybe not quick, but a fix to it, and then we'll sign off. Either one of you can go for a quick fix to this terrible problem.
Well, sadly, because we're dealing with human behavior and good judgment and honesty, there are no quick fixes. People can manipulate the system under certain circumstances. They can use it to their advantage, and the delays that are generally involved in litigation, especially in family courts, can hurt kids, can hurt victims. But we're also fighting human relationships. I think we all in our lives have known people that we felt were in a bad relationship. And woe be to you that you go in, whether it's a family member or a friend, and you have the intervention or you sit down with them and say, hey, this guy's no good for you. You can do so much better. Well, then the next week they get back together and you're the bad guy for giving them advice.
Exactly.
And that's the human part of this that...
And you could even get beat up for that, so.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is where human beings are unique, different, and can be very frustrating. But I think that's where we rely on our institutions, whether it's the courts, the prosecutor's office, the police, DCS, to make the best judgments they can under intense and tough circumstances where we have limited information.
True. And so, my right hand, I just want to ask you how you're doing.
I'm doing good.
Because we count on you. You know all those things out there. You know those people. All right,
Yep,
so.
I've seen a lot of cases of domestic violence throughout the years, and it's very often a lose-lose situation.
I would agree.
All right, so it is time to go. This has been the Probable Cause podcast. I think we're going to upload our first one today and get those other ones up there very quickly. Hope you tune in. I'm Jamie Duffy, a journalist here in town. This is Michael McAlexander, Allen County Prosecutor. And of course, my right hand. You'll be able to find us on our dedicated Facebook page, on YouTube, on my Facebook page, and who knows, eventually Instagram and TikTok. So for now, goodbye.
Good afternoon.
This episode is filmed and edited by Frosty Pictures. The Probable Cause is produced by Maumee Media.